Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Divinity Monthly Live series, where we connect the dots between public and planetary health. I'm your host, Priyanka Nathani, and today I am so excited to welcome Dr. Minil Patel, vegan activist and general practice doctor based out of London, UK. Vegan for almost 5 years, Dr. Patel has a keen interest in plant based nutrition, health, and fitness, and the power of lifestyle medicine in the treatment and prevention of chronic disease. He does bodybuilding and strength training in his spare time while also teaching others about plant based nutrition using social media. He is living proof that you don't need animal protein to be fit, strong, and healthy, and he wants to show others that they can too reduce their use of animal products for the benefit of the planet, their health, and the animals. Today, we're here to connect the dots between meat, media, and masculinity to answer the question, does eating meat really make you manly? Dr. Patel, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
We'd love to start with what inspired you to go vegan?
Um, okay, so the story is quite long. So I'll start from the beginning, I guess, like growing up, because I think that kind of sets the scene. So growing up, I always loved animals. Like I always used to play with animals, and if anyone had a pet animal, I'd always I'd be the kid that's always with the pets. Even though I didn't have a pet myself, so I've always loved animals. But then I've always eaten them as well. So that was a bit of a paradox that growing up I didn't really think about. It was just the accepted thing, and I guess it still is, right? You can love animals and still eat them, which now looking back doesn't really make sense to me. Um, but anyway, growing up, I always loved animals, but I was mainly eating meat, not in the house, outside the house, because my household vegetarian. And then I think I got to, I think my teenage years, when you're coming into kind of becoming a young man, the meat intake kind of ramped up because I guess meat eating was associated with masculinity, which we're going to talk about today, right? And I think around me as well, I was seeing like my dad, my uncle, all the male kind of relatives in my household, they all ate meat. But the women didn't. The women were vegetarian. So I kind of associated this meat eating already, like from a young age, with being a boy, being a man, masculinity, right? And then I went to a all boys secondary school, or you guys call it high school over there. So again, I'm surrounded by 180 other young men, a lot of testosterone. People are coming, kind of becoming men. And again, the meat intake went up again. And then I started hitting the gym. And obviously, you need meat to build muscle, right? That's what everyone thinks. So the meat eating went up again. And I think by the time I was in medical school, I was eating meat like 3 times a day. I was
Oh.
pretty much every meal. It was looking back, it's crazy. And I think people that knew me before I went vegan were most surprised when I went vegan because I was probably the last person on earth you'd think would go vegan, the amount of meat I was consuming. But I still said I loved animals and I still maintained that. Eventually, around 2016, I think it was, or 2015, can't remember the exact date, but a few of my friends were going to go greyhound racing on a night out for one of their birthdays, and I said no, I'm not gonna come to that. I objected on ethical grounds, and one of their girlfriends at the time turned around and said to me, "But don't you eat meat? Like you're not going to go greyhound racing because of the ethical reasons, but don't you eat meat?" And I was like, she had a point, and I felt like a bit of a hypocrite at that point. And it left me thinking. But did I stop eating meat that night? No, I didn't. But it did get me thinking, and then I think sometime in 2016, I started talking to a vegan woman online, and we'd have discussions and debates about veganism, and I found myself agreeing with pretty much everything she was saying. I didn't have an answer whenever she asked me questions of, you know, um, why do you eat meat? Do you think it's wrong to harm animals? Do you think it's wrong to kill animals? All these questions, and I found myself kind of skirting around the issue, and in the end, I agreed with her a lot. So then, what ended up happening was I ended up dating this woman, and we went to an animal sanctuary together, and that was the first time I've ever seen animals that have been kind of saved from slaughterhouses, and I've kind of been faced with that reality, because before I was buying meat packaged ready to go, and I was very removed from the whole process, right? Which the majority of the world are. They're completely removed from what happens to these animals, and we end up calling it meat. The language changes, and I think when I was faced with these animals living in front of me, sheep, cows, donkeys, those pigs, and I'm there making the pigs bed, and I'm feeding the cows carrots, and I'm feeding the sheep carrots, and I'm thinking, these are my victims. These are the animals that people like me and myself would be responsible for harming and killing. But here they are, free, living their lives, and I was so happy just to be around them in their presence, like that these animals are free. So I had a lot of thinking to do after that day, and I went home, and I think again I still didn't go vegan straight away. I went home, and I think 7 days after that day, my girlfriend at the time sent me a YouTube video and said, "Here, watch this." And I said, "Is this video going to make me go vegan? I don't want to watch it," And I think a lot of people do that. A lot of people don't want to know because they're afraid of how it might change them. They're
Mhm.
afraid of what it may do. It may change their mind. And I had for years had avoided watching slaughterhouse footage. I knew about how bad it was, but I guess I didn't know just how bad it was. And I avoided it completely. But this time I thought I'll watch this video. It's a online discussion. It's a talk by Gary Yourofsky, a vegan activist, and he just gives a very passionate talk about why eating animals is wrong to a group of university students. Um, and halfway between in that video, he shows slaughterhouse footage, and I was told by my girlfriend at the time to not watch that part because she did not want me to be swayed by the emotional side of things. She wanted me to see the logic behind veganism. Um, but I ended up watching that video as well, and it made me cry, and I cried for I think for the remainder of the video. I was just in tears, and I've never, apart from like witnessing death, I've never been that emotionally shocked by something. Uh, to the point where because I was so involved, right? It was because these animals that are being treated that way. I'm part of that. When you see disasters on TV and things, you're a bit removed because you're not the one causing it usually. But these animals that were suffering in farms and things and being killed, I felt part of that, and I felt that this is because of me. This is happening, and my strong emotional response kind of left me with no other choice. I had to make a change. I had to align my actions with my morals and say, look, I'm gonna have to be vegan. And I think that's it. July 7th, 2017, overnight, I made the switch, and
Wow.
I woke up the next day and I just did not eat meat, fish, dairy again. I think I still had a few. I still had some protein shake left over, which had dairy in it, so I'd finished that week. But
Mhm.
after that, yeah, I've not gone back. It's, I would say it's been the best decision of my life. So
Yeah. Wow. Wow,
yeah,
that moment of truth.
mm,
That's a very, very powerful story, Dr. Patel. Thank you for sharing that. And you said something really interesting in the
mm,
beginning about how growing up you associated meat with masculinity and then
mm,
vegetarianism with femininity, or there was like some
yeah,
gendered aspect where you saw women eating vegetarian mostly and then men eating meat to make them more masculine. And so
definitely.
have you ever felt that abstaining from eating meat would make you less masculine?
I think at the time growing up, I may have thought that. I think, and that may have been part of the reason that I wouldn't have made the switch because, well, interestingly, when I was about 8 or 9 years old, I did try going vegetarian for and it lasted a few months. And at that time, what I noticed was I was almost ridiculed by the male members of my family, kind of goaded into, try this bacon, try this meat, you don't want to eat this, don't you miss chicken, did it? And it all came from the male part of my family, like the men and like my uncles and my older cousins, like it came from them. It didn't come from the women. They were quite accepting of it and they understood and they were happy for me and things. Um, and then obviously I went back to eating meat after a couple of months. And then when I was in school again, I associated eating meat with masculinity. So it never crossed my mind to go vegetarian because again, like I just thought, well, I need the meat for muscles and strength
Right.
and protein. And again, muscles and strength is associated with masculinity. Um, so I guess I saw it in that light rather than, and maybe because I've been fed this by the kind of my cultural surroundings, but also by the media, on TV and things. you just associated meat with masculinity. So even if you're not making that conscious kind of, you're not thinking about it consciously, subconsciously, there is something there that kind of makes you think, if I go vegetarian, then I'm going to be less of a man in some way. Um, so yeah, I think that's pretty much it. It didn't. I don't think it stopped me consciously, but subconsciously there was that barrier. And it's only after going vegan did I actually think consciously about it and go, oh my god, there is a huge link here. Um,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more of that subconscious barrier, because I'm
Mm,
really curious to know, you brought up media, and today we're talking
mm,
about meat, media, and masculinity. And so, how has media shaped your worldview? Because in media, generally, meat is shown as a symbol of power, dominance, and
mm,
this is what our society deems as masculine. And I recently read a study by the University of British Columbia that found that men who eat meat, or excuse me, men who don't eat meat are
mm,
often seen in society as less masculine. Is this
mm.
something that you've observed in your experience? And if so, why do you think that is?
Yeah, so I think I've seen something similar to that study in Canada that was done, and masculinity itself is quite a funny concept. I think it's constantly being defined by what you are and what you are not as well, or what you do and don't do as well. So meat is considered masculine, and eating meat is masculine, but vegetables are not. And if you eat vegetables and don't eat meat, then you are not masculine; you are feminine. Um,
Mhm.
and I think it's just like, typically meat eating is such a masculine act, and it's so like kind of irreducibly, like culturally, symbolically, and materially linked to masculinity. This the act of eating meat, the what it symbolizes, what it means in certain cultures throughout the world. And I think that's been fed like historically by the dominant culture, which we can't not discuss the patriarchy, because the patriarchal culture is the dominant culture, and that has been the case throughout history, and that has shaped the worldview and what is right and what it isn't. Men have always led by might is right. We have dominated, what we view as lesser beings, animals, and that is a masculine thing to do. Hunting, a very masculine activity, and it was typically in history that men would go out and hunt and bring back the meat to feed. If you ascribe to the hunter-gatherer kind of view on things. And in certain cultures around the world as well, like meat would be for the men, and women would usually either have less of the meat, or the men would get the lion's share of the meat, and women would get less. And sometimes if meat was scarce, women would go without, and that's just been the way culturally and historically throughout the years. And then moving towards kind of like the 19th century, where now culture is shaping. There are books being written about what is considered proper behavior and things. So you had in Great Britain, meat was for men in the cookbooks, and women were told to eat salad or vegetables. Um, and this kept being perpetuated up until kind of even colonial times, when you had colonization of other countries. The white men that invaded these countries would be eating meat, whereas they would look at what was being eaten in these other cultures, which is usually rice and beans and vegetable proteins, vegetable foods, and it would be looked down upon. So this whole kind of binary concept of masculine, feminine, meat and vegetables, and meat is always held in such a higher regard. It's the
Mhm.
center of our plates at meals. When you look at a Sunday roast, you're looking at this centerpiece, which is either a pig or a turkey. Same with Christmas and Thanksgiving. It's all centered around meat, and this has
Mhm.
just fueled that, hasn't it, over time, where meat is the center of everything. Men are the dominant culture, and they will perpetuate that.
Mhm.
And then not eating meat will make you less of a man, kind of thing. So
Right.
that's happened over that time. And then, as you said, media. How has the media helped fuel that as well? You just have to look at the advertisements for like McDonald's or Burger King. There's a ad in China that came out for the Big Mac, and it was it talked about, like, it shows a man holding his bride, strong man, and then he's like doing like it's just showing all these different traits of masculinity. You can check it out on YouTube.
Mhm.
And it ends by saying manly man, and then it shows the burger, and it's obviously a big meat burger. And that was just one example. But we've seen it with the Whopper and with Burger King. We've seen it in cookbooks as well. You'll see that when they have the male section of cookbooks, it'll be barbecued meat, and the women's section will be salads. Typically, as well, when you look at TV shows, it'll be the who's standing at the head of the barbecue with their chef hat on and the grill ready to go. A man, with a chef's apron, and he's grilling that meat. Whereas the women are bringing salad to the table, a potato salad or something like that. It's just in your face all the time. Men, meat, men all the time. And
Mhm.
I think you're taking that in. We're consuming, right? We're consuming this narrative over time, and you can't help but kind of be completely influenced by it. So I think, and as you said, there was a study in Canada that looked at men that ate men that were vegan or vegetarian were looked down upon by others, kind of judged for it, and that's typically the case as well. I think over time, and that's why if you actually look at the populations of vegan men in let's say the USA, they make up about 20. I think it's like 22% of the total vegan population are men,
Mhm.
and in England it's something similar, it's like 28%. So the vast majority of vegans and vegetarians tend to be women,
Mhm.
um, and that's because of this history of and cultural history of the divide between what is considered masculine and feminine. I think women tend to be more caring and empathetic, and that's more acceptable as well for women to be more caring and empathetic. When men do it, they're ridiculed. You know,
Right.
it's almost it's like they're disavowing their masculinity by choosing tofu over steak.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, so society has accepted these dominant narratives that
mm,
are it's deeply interwoven. Like you said, it's in our face.
mm,
And it's something that we've consumed this dominant narrative for centuries on end. How do we rewrite this story? What
mm.
advice would you give to change the dominant narrative that meat equates to manly? How can we rewrite this?
I think asking people to think about it, like this conversation already is an insight into what people don't think about. Nobody thinks about meat; they just see it as food. That's one thing already. You're already, because of the language we're using to describe it, it's seen as food. It's not seen as a once living being. That's completely removed from the picture. um, so thinking about what we're talking about here is one thing, like the meat, and then another layer is to think about, well, why is that meat connected to masculinity? Like where did that come from?
Mhm.
um, and asking people to not think about what they're eating, or what you eat doesn't define how masculine you are, okay, at all. There are so many vegan men now out there who you know, traditionally you could argue that are very, very masculine. They're strength trainers, they're strong men like Patrick Bermubian. You've got Kendrick Farris, who's a USA Olympic lifter, Nimai Delgado, bodybuilder, Torrey Washington. There's so many. I could name so many more of these men who you'd consider typically to be masculine, who are going vegan. So you can already see that the argument's just not there to say that you need meat to be masculine. It just doesn't exist. Um, Typically, meat eating has been seen as something that increases virility, how virile you are. Oddly enough, a study has like they did a large scale meta analysis. No, it was a cohort study of 21,000 people, which showed 21,000 men, which showed that the more red meat and the more processed meat you ate, the higher your chance of erectile dysfunction,
Mhm.
because of the way red meat and processed red meat impacts your cardiovascular system and your vascular system. So, if virility is associated with eating meat, explain this: that the
Mhm.
more red meat and meat you, and it's typically this red meat, the steaks, isn't it, that's associated with manliness and is causing erectile dysfunction. And
Mhm.
it's the people that ate more Mediterranean style or plant based diets that had better outcomes and did not suffer as much from erectile dysfunction.
Mhm.
So that was one interesting study, which completely disproves that. The other thing is, people I think view the meat eating with the whole strength and muscles and masculinity thing as well. Another study done just 2 years ago in Brazil showed that vegans can build muscle the exact same as omnivores, as long as you match the protein. So as long as protein is matched, vegans have no problem gaining muscle either. So what's really holding people back? I think it's the symbolism of eating meat, and also people. I think some men enjoy eating meat, so I think that needs to be looked at. Like, we need to find a way to get through to men, and make them realize you don't need it for virility, you don't need it for strength. It doesn't make you more masculine at all.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's really powerful. I mean, um, we were sharing a little bit earlier about how there's dominant media narratives and
Mm,
advertisements that are shared,
mm,
um, like between McDonald's, KFC, all these different corporations. But then I actually recently saw an advertisement with Kevin Hart and Beyond Meat Burger.
mm,
Have you
mm.
seen that? Where
Yeah.
it's like changing the dominant narrative around, like you were painting this picture, like who stands behind the grill, and then this like manly aspect of like flipping burgers and
Mm,
having that like sensation of biting
mm,
into meat, which you touched upon, like a lot of people really even just enjoy
mm,
its pleasure or taste. And so how can we match protein, maybe have those same like taste experiences, but reduce cruelty, like be in alignment with public and planetary health. And
mm,
so I really appreciate your perspective on how to rewrite this, because you're right, having conversations like this is really powerful.
mm,
um, and something that often isn't talked about is also the emotions
mm,
associated with masculinity. I feel like typically there's like stereotypes that as a macho masculine archetype, men are not meant to express themselves
mm,
emotionally. And so I kind of want to touch a little bit on
mm,
that. If you could share with us a little bit, before you were vegan, putting
mhm.
yourself back in those shoes, do you remember some of the emotions you felt? Yeah.
I think, yeah. So before I went vegan, I think when I just generally when I ate meat, I think I was so far removed from what I was eating most of the time. If I did consciously think about it, if someone reminded me that what I was eating was once living, I did feel like guilt. Um, I felt guilt, and I would try and bury that. I would try and bury that guilt and in the emotions I felt, and then I would just tell myself, actually, no, I'm eating meat. I'm like an apex predator. I'm powerful. The human beings at the top of the food chain. I try to replace that, and fed that kind of, that part of masculinity, which is the dominance, the need to feel powerful.
Mhm.
Um, and I still had this. It's that meat paradox. I still loved animals, and I was still conflicted. I was clearly conflicted when I was eating this. The main emotions I felt was when I was eating them. I feel powerful at the time. When I'm not thinking about what I'm eating that much. But then if I think deeply about it, then the guilt took over, and the sadness really.
Mm. And putting yourself today in this present
Mm.
moment as someone who is vegan, what
Mhm.
emotional shifts did you experience?
I guess it was almost like a weight has been lifted off me. I felt like that guilt kind of dissipated a bit more. I just didn't feel now when I eat food, I know it's made of plants, and I think I'm so grateful for this food, and that this food is nourishing me, and nothing had to be killed for it, nothing had to like suffer for it and be killed for it. Um, so that felt that shift that I'm now doing less harm, and I think now that's kind of empowered me as well because I want to be able to show others that they can also live that way, that they don't need to have that meat paradox. They can love animals and also not eat them. They can do that. So I think, yeah, that's the main thing I'd say. I think the guilt has dissipated and I feel more empowered and feel more not purified, but like spiritual, like even spiritually, I felt a lot better, cleaner now that after going vegan for sure.
Hmm. Yeah, no, that is very, very powerful. It sounds like a the journey to this moment has been one of transformation
Mm,
and reconnection, back into what you define as masculine, which sounds like a person rooted in compassion, awareness, connection to all living beings, which is completely rewriting this dominant narrative around masculinity. And I think that being that example is really powerful.
Mhm.
So I would like to ask you if there's a message you'd like to share with everyone today, something to leave everyone with.
Um, so I think my main message is simple: that you don't need meat to be masculine, and that myth around meat making you more of a man has long been perpetuated by the dominant culture of patriarchy. Okay, I think people need to take that term seriously and think about what it actually means. I think people hearing it turned off by it. Um, and I encourage everyone to read Carol Adams's book, Sexual Politics of Meat. I think that was a real eye opener for me reading that book, because it did teach me how intertwined patriarchy and veganism and feminism is linked. And I think going back to like dominant culture patriarchy, she describes it as being built on the principles of objectification, fragmentation, and consumption. And I think people need to take a minute and think what they're doing when they eat the meat, and they need to stop objectifying others, so animals, stop fragmenting their bodies, and both physically and metaphorically, stop using the terms like legs and thighs to talk about what's living a living animal, and moving away from that as a whole, as a society, and no longer just consuming without thought, and moving forwards to a more equal and fair society for all, free of violence and oppression to all beings, so human and non-human alike.
Mm. Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Patel. That is very, very powerful. And again, I thank you for joining us today on Divinity's monthly live series, where we connect the dots between public and planetary health and talk to amazing individuals like yourself. Thank you so much again. And to learn more about Dr. Patel's work, please follow him on Instagram at Dr. Iron Junkie. And to stay up to date on all things connecting the dots, follow Divinity on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and check out our YouTube and Spotify for more content. Thank you so much, Dr. Patel, and until next time.
Thanks for having me.